Welcome to chapter 22, fungi. This chapter is this presentation is an abbreviation of the actual chapter. Whatever materials that we don't cover in the presentation, you are not responsible for on your exam. So only what I present to you today will be on your exam. So fungi, let's talk about it. Fungi are actually really, really important, particularly to our crops. Fungi produce microscopic spores that winds can disperse in long distances. And as a result, it's really difficult to prevent the spread of a fungal pathogen such as the wheat stem rust. If you don't realize it, the majority of our diet is made up of wheat. And this mold, called wheat stem rust, can really hurt our crops. A new strain of wheat stem rust called UG99 is able to infect most wheat varieties that were previously considered resistant. It originated from Uganda, that's why it's called UG99, and winds have caused spores to travel to Iran and India with this fungus. Countries like India and Asia and countries in Asia are one of the most highly populated countries, and they need the wheat to survive. They need to be able to feed the people in their countries. This is a really great video that talks about UG99, and I highly recommend it. But if you're wondering why we have to learn about fungi, it's incredibly important towards human and animal health. So these are student learning objectives, which we'll discuss at the end of this discussion. So fungi. Fungi, like animals, are heterotrophs. What that means is that they need to eat something to survive. They don't make their own food. And unlike animals, fungi have cell walls and digest food outside of their bodies. And they also make spores. So fungus are eukaryotic heterotrophs with cell walls made of something called chitin, and they obtain their nutrients by digesting them outside of the body and absorbing them. That's why you find fungus on food that is rotting or on carcasses that are rotting. Most fungi are saprobes. That means that they feed on organic remains and they serve as essential decomposers in most ecosystems. Mushrooms and molds and yeast are decomposers. Other fungi live in or on organisms and they be harmless, beneficial, or parasitic. So saprobe is an organism that feeds on waste and remains. Another way to remember what a saprobe is a decomposer. Fungi that live as single cells are uniformly called yeast. Isn't that weird? So when you drink a beer, it is made from a fungi called yeast. Usually fungi are multicellular, like molds and mushrooms, which you see here, and they disperse by releasing spores. In a multicelled species, spores germinate and give rise to filaments called hyphae, which typically grow as an extensive mesh called mycelium. So one of these is a hyphae, and the network of them is the mycelium. So hypha are a component of fungal mycelium. It's basically a single filament of cells arranged end to end. And then mycelium are basically a mass of thread-like filaments or multiple hyphae that make up the body of a fungus. There are more than 70,000 species of fungi that have been named. In earlier lineages, like chytrids, glomerulocytes, and zygote fungi, hyphae have a few or no cross walls or septa. More recently, evolved lineages, like sac fungi and club fungi, have hyphae with porous cross walls at regular intervals. In all groups, water and nutrients move freely between the cells of the hypha. So think of the hypha kind of like root-like cells. But if you can see, like the fuzzy stuff on your bread and bread mold, those are multiple hypha or mycelium growing on that bread. So fungi are single-celled and multi-celled heterotrophs that feed by secreting digestive enzymes onto organic matter and then absorbing the released nutrients. You should be able to know the differences between hypha and mycelium, and they know that they produce spores. So the first group of fungi that we're going to talk about are chytrids, zygote fungi, and their relatives. Chytrid and zygote and glomerulocytes are the oldest and least diverse groups of fungi. So these are the fungi that have been on this earth the longest. Chytrid are fungus that make flagellated spores. So where do you think they live? Hopefully you said water. And glomerulocytes are fungus with hyphae that grow inside the wall of a plant root cell. So the first one we're going to talk about are chytrids. Chytrids are the oldest fungal lineage. The chytrids are a mostly aquatic group and the only fungi with flagellated spores. So if I ask you which fungi have flagellated spores, you should pick chytrids on your exam. Chytrids include aquatic decomposers and some that digest cellulose and herbivore guts and parasites. There's a parasitic chytrid that is pushing some frog species to extinction. So what happens is they infect the skin of the frog and the frog can no longer breathe. So chytrids are the oldest fungal lineage and they make flagellated spores and they're parasitic to frogs. Glomerulocytes are another very old fungal lineage, and glomerulocytes live in soil and extend their hyphae into plant roots. So this, you can see inside the plant root, is the mold, and here it is here. What happens is the hyphae branch inside the plant cell walls and deliver nutrients to the plant cells, but also will steal sugars from the plant itself. So the oldest lineages of fungi include chytrids and glomerulocytes. Skunk fungi are the most diverse fungal group. They include single-celled yeast and multi-celled species such as cup fungi and morels, which are what we eat. Sac fungi are the most diverse fungal group. And here's an example of some of the diversity. Yeast that are sac fungi are what help us make wine, breads, and alcoholic beverages. Bread yeast is spores that germinate while bread is rusting. So if you ever wonder, like, where did the holes in your bread come from? They come from the spores of the yeast germinating. The antibiotic penicillin, which we've all taken, was originally isolated from mold. And related molds are used to flavor cheeses. So if you've ever eaten blue cheese, those blue veins are actually sac fungus. Other types of molds include morels truffles, which are edible ascocarps. So this is an ascocarp. Morels develop above ground and truffles form underground. And so people will train their pigs to smell out the truffles. Another interesting sac fungus is a predatory sac fungus called the Arthrobotrys. And what it does is it's going to capture and feed on roundworms. So it literally will lasso the worm and then it'll start to digest the worm from the outside in. So sac fungi are the most diverse fungal lineages, include single cells such as yeast, seeds, and baking, and multi-celled species that have filaments reinforced with cross walls. And when sac fungi reproduce sexually, they produce spores inside the sac-like structure. Many fungal species are symbiotic with photosynthetic cells in lichen, while others are symbionts that live in or on plants. So two that you need to know about are lichen and mycorrhiza. Lichen are a composite organism consisting of fungus and algae. And mycorrhiza is a mutually beneficial partnership between fungus and plant root. So the first one we're talking about is lichen. So lichen is literally a fungus and a green algae coming together, and their mutualistic relationship where the fungus might be using the energy from the photosynthetic cells of the algae, and the algae is going to use the fungus for protection. And this is a great video that explains what lichen looks like and that relationship. So the fungus makes up the bulk of the lichen body and obtains a supply of nutrients from the photosynthetic partner in the green algae. And what they do, and you've seen these growing on logs in the bayou, is the lichens disperse by releasing fragments that include cells from both partners. They are very important as pioneers in new habitats as they facilitate the breakdown of rock to form soil. If you guys remember the succession topics that we discussed in previous chapters. Mycorrhiza, what it does is it's a fungus that hangs around plant roots. And what it does is it helps those plants grow better. So the fungal hyphae form a dense net around the roots, but do not penetrate the roots. And the fungus shares absorbed mineral ions with the plant and gets some photosynthetic sugars in return. And 80% of plants form this relationship. So fungi have interactions with other organisms. Some fungi partner with photosynthetic cells as lichen. Others live in plant roots and benefit the plant by sharing nutrients. Some fungi are pathogens that attack living plants or animals. Fungi that feed on plants can be ecologically and economically important, like the UG99, which could wipe out the wheat in the world. And in humans, fungal infections usually involve the skin or are inhaled. Inhaled fungal spores can cause something called histoplasmosis or coccidioidomycosis, which can be fatal to people with a weakened immune system. Fungal skin infections include things like athlete's foot and ringworm, and fungus can release enzymes that break down the outermost layer of tissue. That's why when you get athlete's foot or ringworm, the skin itches or hurts. And yeast infections of the vagina or armpits is also very common. So fungal infections of the respiratory system are acquired by inhaling the spores. Remember, the spores are the reproductive part of this fungi, and what they cause are pulmonary infections, so that would be the lungs and the heart. Infections are geographically restricted, so infections are seasonal. Only when spores are basically being released can you get it. Individuals most likely to get fungal respiratory infections include males who are rural inhabitants or agriculture workers. So the first one we're going to talk about is valley fever. Valley fever is a fungus found in soil of dry, low rainfall areas. It's very common in southwestern United States, Mexico, and Central and South America. And what happens is an individual will literally breathe in the spores. So construction workers and people digging up the land are going to circulate the spores into the air, and then an individual will breathe it in. And this is where valley fever can be found in the United States. Once inhaled, the spores will then start to set up an infection in your chest. And valley fever symptoms include fever, cough, headache, and a rash of your upper extremities, muscle aches, joint pain in the knees and ankles. Some people develop more severe infections if they have a weakened immune system, and that includes chronic pneumonia, meningitis, or bone infection. A fungal infection that occurs around here is called histoplasmosis. Histoplasmosis is caused by the fungus Histoplasma capsulatum, and the fungus lives in the environment and is usually associated with large amounts of bird or bat droppings. So you usually find it along the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys in caves, but also if you have a ton of bats or birds living in your attic, where they poop is where this fungus will grow. And then what happens is if you go to clean out that attic or you go spelunking or cave diving, what you do is you end up breathing in this fungus. And what happens is it can travel to other parts of the body and set up infection in the body. Many people who are infected with the fungus do not show any symptoms. Others, they may have symptoms within 3 to 17 days after being exposed. Symptoms include things like flu-like symptoms, pneumonia, and lesions on the lungs that take a long time to heal. These are your key terms, and you guys should be able to recognize the unifying features of all fungi and the characteristics of which group is subdivided, and can you describe the specific features in fungi? You should be able to describe the characteristics and physiology of the groups of fungi with a lack of cell walls. Know what makes the different types of fungi that I presented different. So which ones have flagellated sperm? Which ones hang out with roots? Which ones cause human infections? Where do you get valley fever versus histoplasmosis? Those are the things you guys should know for your exam.